So a massive warm welcome to the Narcissistic Trauma Recovery Podcast. It's always really a bittersweet pleasure, isn't it, to have you here on the podcast because, we're in each other's worlds for the most horrendous of reasons, having both of us experiencing narcissistic abuse. And, I just want you to know that there is a light at the end of that tunnel, albeit it might seem really long and dark right now. And this is why I do these podcasts, so that you know that you're not on your own in any of this, that I see you, I hear you, I've been where you are, and I want you to know that there is light and there is hope. Now, in today's episode, I want to talk to you really about something that's really a real passion of mine around narcissistic abuse and trauma in general, and that's really chronic illness. Now, the first thing that I want to say is these are all my own opinions, what I'm sharing with you. So if any doubt, then please seek your own medical guidance and advice here as well, because I'm not a medical doctor. And these are just things that I've learned along my own journey and things that I want to share with you, and some of the things that I know from a trauma-informed lens perspective as well. So when we talk about trauma, which narcissistic abuse is, I know because I see it in my community all of the time. Many people are suffering with these chronic illnesses, and very few are actually culminating and integrating them, that they may have something to do with the abuse that they have endured with a narcissist. They kind of see it as two separate entities. The abuse is on one side, and then all of a sudden they get a diagnosis for something else. It could be fibromyalgia or IBS or rheumatoid arthritis or alopecia, for instance. And these seem to be separate diagnostics away from narcissistic abuse. And really what I want you to start to think about from listening to this podcast is being an advocate for your own health here. Now, I'm not certainly here to say that, all disease and illness that is out there is caused by narcissistic abuse or trauma. But what I want you to really start to get curious about from your own perspective is how much of maybe your chronic illness that you are suffering with is caused from an element of emotional trauma as opposed to something physical that has actually happened. And I'll use my mum as an example here. So my mum went through some childhood trauma and then through her marriage. And very early on in her 30s, she got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition. Now, my mum suffered with that so badly up until the day that she died. And she was still really in her, 67 years old, too young to pass away. But I'd always felt, as her daughter, recognizing that she was in constant pain, I really felt as an empath, really kind of powerless to help her in any other way. I see it very, very differently now, insofar as I know rheumatoid arthritis for my mum was really an incredible protector part for her. And that protector part was, if my mum was focusing on the pain of her arthritis every single day, what she wasn't then focusing on was the pain of how she felt as a child, not good enough, not lovable enough. And when we start to understand pain, illness as parts of us and start to get curious about why they are there, we can start to come up with different answers. So if we look at my mum's condition, rheumatoid arthritis, for instance, I do a lot of IFS or internal family systems in the work that I do with my clients. And really IFS is an evidence-based parts therapy. And a lot of that initially started with a rheumatoid arthritis research study around looking at rheumatoid arthritis as a protector part. And that might seem really, really crazy to you. How can pain or a chronic illness be a protector part? Because it's painful and it hurts and it stops you from doing something. But remember, our nervous system works by showing up for us to distract and soothe us away from something that our inner system thinks might be too painful for us to feel. Now, when I look back at my mum, and again, all of these are my own opinions about all of this, but when I look back at my mum's rheumatoid arthritis, I now think, whoa, what an amazing protector part for her, totally distracting her away from those feelings of worthlessness and unlovability. So even though she was in pain and focusing on that pain, then initially that came about as a protector part to distract her away from something. As time progressed, though, it did become physical. It wore away at her joints. My mum ended up with titanium rods in both of her wrists. So she was in a lot of pain. And obviously, the long-term damaging effects, obviously, of chronic illnesses, autoimmune disorders like that, they are going to have an impact on our body at some stage. But for things like fibromyalgia, for instance, there's no definitive test for fibromyalgia. It's a series of questions that you need to answer, and then you're given this diagnosis of fibromyalgia. Now, again, I've worked with many clients who've come to me with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, and we've worked on their root cause and their trauma. And then all of a sudden, all of the symptoms that led them to be diagnosed with fibromyalgia suddenly disappear, because fibromyalgia was actually a protective part for them, distracting them away from their core wound. Now, again, I'm not here to say that any of you listening right now with a diagnosis, it's because they are protective parts and that's why they're there. But I want you to get really curious about, could there be an element of distraction in your body working for you like this? Because maybe the pain of feeling something else would be too great for your system to feel. Now, that doesn't mean if you do your inner work and trauma work that protector part's going to go away. But let's say, for instance, you have a pain scale and it's, you're suffering with fibromyalgia and it's 10 out of 10 on the pain scale. It's real agony for you. What if 5 out of 10 of that was from emotional trauma, a core wound? And when we work on that, we move it from 10 out of 10 on the pain scale to 5 out of 10. Now, of course, that still means you are in pain, but it's still less pain than what you were in before you worked on that emotional trauma. Now, when we get diagnosed with things like chronic illness, a lot of the reasons are because our body is pumping out cortisol longer than it need be pumping that out. When we go into trauma responses, for instance, like fight, flight, or freeze, our body will secrete into our bloodstream cortisol, because we want to mobilize that energy in our body if we needed to fight or to run away. Now, sometimes after a period of time, our adrenal glands, which is what pumps out the cortisol which sends messages from our brain all through our body, the HPA axis that pumps out. Sometimes our adrenal glands get really, really tired, and we can maybe get diagnosed with ME or chronic fatigue syndrome, or we just feel burnt out and we can't get out of bed or anything. We can't mobilize any energy there because our adrenal glands literally are exhausted, okay? And sometimes when we work with that, we can re-energize those adrenal glands. We need to know what we're doing with this and working from a trauma space, a somatic perspective, to really work on the core wounds of all of this as well. And it doesn't mean that we're going to cure anything. It doesn't mean they're going to completely go away. Although I have to say, I have seen this many, many times when I've worked with my clients. But it means we're going to get really curious. We're going to be an advocate for your own health. And we're going to start to recognize, well, how much of this could maybe be caused by emotional trauma, and maybe how much of it is just physical and something that I may have too. And when we start to recognize all of these, we start to take back our power in being an advocate for our own health and feeling like we are able to do something as opposed to nothing. And if we say sort of 85% plus of disease and illness, which means, yes, there will be some that is totally nothing to do with trauma, but there will be a huge amount of things that I have seen over and over again that have a trauma element. IBS, fibromyalgia, some certain types of autoimmune disorders, alopecia, for instance. All of these, when I have worked with clients and we've really started to work somatically, really working on that trauma, we've seen such a big difference in the diagnosis that they have been given, because very often people will present with certain symptoms. And if you imagine, certainly from a digestive position, if we're in a constant fight-flight response, digestion goes out the window. Our body's like, hey, I don't care what your digestion's like. We just need to be ready to fight or to run away. And then we wonder why we're suffering with things like IBS, because our digestive system gets really, really sluggish, because all of our energy internally is literally getting ready to fight or to flight. But very often, if we're not in actual danger, but we're perceiving that actual danger because of our past experiences, because it might mean, the narcissist is behaving like this because I'm not good enough, that becomes our core wound. So we're constantly in this state of fight, flight, or freeze, pumping out this cortisol all the time, even though we're not in actual danger. Our danger to us is someone making us feel a certain way. So we're just really hypervigilant, and we're really, really aware, or hypovigilant, and we go into a freeze response as well. So I want you to start to get curious. And I'd love to hear from you as well with this. It always really fascinates me. I think because of my mom and her having rheumatoid arthritis, I used to see things very, very differently. But having obviously done all 3 levels of IFS and working with somatic experiencing and really looking how trauma affects our body, And, the adrenaline, the cortisol, leading to inflammation in our body. So many of us are walking around with literally an inflamed body. We have edema, we have swelling, all of these things we have. I got diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I got diagnosed with long QT syndrome. I got diagnosed with hay fever. And all of these, for me, I am convinced are all trauma related. Convinced. That doesn't mean they are, and it doesn't mean a doctor has told me that. These are my own opinions, like I say, and you must seek out your own, healthcare advice with all of this. But I'm convinced from my personal perspective that these were caused by trauma. My liver literally got really, really sluggish, and I was diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it wasn't even necessarily related to alcohol. It was probably the foods I was eating at the time, because I was eating rubbish food, because I was in trauma responses. My liver got really, really sluggish. That led to inflammation. It led to more swelling as well. Definitely noticed the swelling because, again, how our liver works, it's the filtration system. So it's no wonder then I went on to then get diagnosed with a heart condition too. So I can start to see how all of these are related. Histamine production as well because of trauma. I genuinely believe, I started to suffer with hay fever 6 months into my pregnancy when I found out my ex-husband was having an affair. So when I start to put these pieces together, I can start to see all of that. So me working on my emotional trauma, that doesn't mean I don't have a heart condition, but my QT, which is the electrical impulses in my heart, has definitely shortened now, which is a good thing. And then from the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at my last blood test, completely had reversed it. So, there are all these different elements that start to come up. I just want you to be an advocate for your own health. Whatever diagnosis you may have, and that's not to take that away or say don't take any medication. Absolutely not. You always do this in conjunction with your own healthcare provider. But I want you, if you know you have experienced trauma, and narcissistic abuse is trauma, then maybe just start to get a little bit curious about that as well. Maybe start to think about doing some somatic work. And again, if you want any advice on somatic work, I've got a great Regulate program, which is all about nervous system healing. Or indeed, if you want any advice to come and work with one of my somatic coaches that I have trained as well, then please do drop me an email at hello@carolinestrawson.com as well. I'll put the link to Regulate below so you can have a little look around that. That's all about somatic healing and vagus nerve toning. This is just about being an advocate for our own health, and that is for me, as I was going through my healing journey from narcissistic abuse, I wanted to feel that I was stepping into my own power. And as a woman, I felt even more strongly about that as well. So as a woman who is on HRT, I have a patch that I wear on my bum cheek that I change every few days. I have testosterone gel, and I also have estrogel as well. And I also have progesterone, completely life-changing with that, doing my own inner work. I'm an advocate for my own health. I really, really am. That's not to say for you guys to do any of this. This is about you doing your own research, in conjunction with your own healthcare providers, and you becoming your best version of yourself with your optimal health too. So I'd love to know, does this resonate with you? Do you feel like, no, that's it, I've got that, which is absolutely fine. But just get curious, when did all of these things happen? What's the timeline with it? What do you think would happen if you did treat it as a part of you? What do you think your system would think you'd be feeling like if you weren't focusing on that condition? Now, cognitively, you might say, well, I don't want it there. It'd be much better in my life. If we look at it like a part, that part doesn't know that. So get curious about that and see what comes up as well. So I just wanted to share this because it's something I see a lot in my community, and it is really important when we think about chronic pain to not just think about it from a purely medical perspective, but to really think about the trauma history of that person as well, to see how much, if we worked on the trauma history somatically, how much maybe can we dial down that pain that person is feeling as well. So take care, my friends. I'm thrilled as always to have you listen. And, don't forget to drop me messages if you've got any suggestions of any episodes or anything else you'd like me to share. Make sure you hit me with a follow over on Instagram as well. And again, if you want to come and join my free support group on Facebook, the link is always in the show notes for you to do that as well. So take care, everybody, and I will see you on the next episode.